When a demolition crew in a quiet American town uncovered a 1950s convertible buried beneath a parking lot, they never expected what lay inside a rusted suitcase, a voice from the past, and a secret that had haunted Hazelwood for 60 years. Stay with us, hit like, and subscribe for the full story behind the car that time tried to forget. The morning began like any other at the Hazelwood demolition site. Pale light spread through the fog, diffusing across cracked concrete and rusted guardrails. Samuel Reeves stood at the edge of the pit with his thermos in hand, the steam rising like ghosts in the chill air. At 52, he carried the quiet wear of a man who'd spent half his life around the growl of machines. He was steady, methodical, a man who measured his days by the rhythm of engines and the weight of earth being moved. Around him, workers shouted over the rattle of the excavator, and the ground shuddered with every bite of the steel bucket. He took a sip of coffee, watching the fog thin. The old Hazelwood parking garage had stood for nearly 70 years, a gray skeleton of the town's past. Now it was coming down its concrete bones, destined for dust and new foundations. Buildings came down, something new took their place. You didn't think about what came before, you just built forward. Then the excavator hit something. A sharp clang rang out, metal striking metal, not the dull resistance of rebar or pipe. The sound sliced through the drone of machines, clean and foreign. Samuel froze. "Hold it," he called, raising a gloved hand. The excavator idled, releasing a long sigh of compressed air. Dust hung suspended in the morning light. He climbed down the slope toward the machine boot, sinking into loose gravel. Probably an old utility line, said Mike the operator, leaning out of the cab. Samuel frowned. There aren't supposed to be any lines under this slab. We checked the maps twice. Mike shrugged. Then what the hell is that? Samuel knelt beside the shallow gouge in the earth. The bucket had scraped across a surface smoother than it should have been, metal broad and curved. He brushed his hand across it. Beneath the dirt, a faint glint of faded blue paint caught the light. "Stop everything," he said quietly. "Nobody touches this until I look at the blueprints again." He radioed up to the trailer office. Within minutes, one of the engineers jogged over with a rolled-up plan. They spread it across the hood of a truck, the paper flapping in the wind. Samuel traced the area with a calloused finger. The layout showed concrete footing drainage, a foundation beam, but nothing below. No tank, no structure, nothing. "There's no record of any sub-level construction," the engineer said, brow furrowing. "That space should be solid fill." Samuel stared back at the pit. His stomach tightened. Things buried that weren't supposed to be there always meant trouble. Environmental violations, lawsuits, sometimes worse. "All right," he said at last. "We uncover it by hand. No machines until I know what it is." The men set to work with shovels and small picks, scraping away layers of compacted soil. The fog had lifted by now, replaced by a thin autumn sun that made the dust shimmer like ash. Hours slipped by. What began as a small patch of exposed metal widened into a smooth curve, the roof of something large, rounded at the corners, faintly elegant, despite the decay. Mike wiped his forehead. "You seeing this, Sam? That looks like a damn car." Samuel didn't answer right away. He crouched again, tracing the line where paint met rust. The shape was unmistakable, a roof line, the ghost of a windshield frame. He felt a strange chill crawl up his spine, a sensation both familiar and foreign. "How the hell does a car end up under a parking garage foundation?" he muttered. No one spoke. The only sound was the rhythmic thud of shovels and the distant pulse of traffic from Main Street above. Even the crew, usually quick with jokes, had gone quiet. The discovery had shifted something in the air. Samuel felt it too, a heaviness, as if the ground itself were holding its breath. When the whistle blew for lunch, no one moved toward their coolers. They just stood around the pit, staring at the gleam of blue metal slowly emerging from the dirt. Samuel rubbed his jaw. "Cover it with tarp," he said finally. "We'll get the city inspector out here, and someone pull every archive plan from the 50s on this property." As the men dispersed, he stayed behind, staring down into the hole. The car, if that's what it was, had been sealed in perfectly, encased by layers of concrete and earth, as if someone had built the structure deliberately to hide it. He could almost feel time pressing down on it, 60 years of silence packed tight into the cold ground. The sun dipped lower bleeding gold across the site. A faint breeze stirred the tarp, whispering through the rebar skeleton of the half-demolished garage. Samuel lingered a moment longer, his boots coated in fine gray dust. Something about this didn't sit right. The maps, the sealed foundation, the precision of how the object was buried. He could sense that much already. He had uncovered strange things before: old pipes, forgotten vaults, but never anything that made the back of his neck prickle like this. He climbed into his truck, the seat creaking beneath his weight. For a long time he didn't start the engine. The fading light turned the pit into a dark oval shadow, swallowing everything inside it. Samuel took one last look before driving off. Whatever they had found today wasn't just metal and dust. It was a secret, and secrets like that had a way of pulling everything and everyone down with them. By the next morning, the site looked different. The fog was gone, replaced by the brittle clarity of early autumn sunlight cutting through the dust that still hung above the pit. Samuel arrived before the others, coffee in one hand, the other tucked deep in his jacket pocket. The tarp covering yesterday's discovery had stiffened overnight edges, crusted with dry mud. He pulled it back slowly, revealing the same curved line of metal now streaked with morning dew. The faint reflection of light off the faded paint seemed to pulse as the day began, as if the thing buried there wanted to breathe again. The crew arrived one by one, quieter than usual. No one joked, no one asked questions. They just gathered near the edge and waited for Samuel's direction. He gestured toward the pit. "Same as before," he said evenly. "Careful hands only." The shovels struck the ground in rhythm, a steady beat against the compacted soil. Inch by inch, the shape took form. The curve of a roof gave way to a rear fender, the ghost of a chrome line dulled by years of corrosion. It was beautiful in a tragic way, something built to move, frozen forever beneath earth and concrete. By midday, most of the top half was exposed, a 1950s convertible, small, sleek, unmistakably American. Samuel wiped his forehead with the back of his hand and leaned closer. The car was intact, buried deliberately, not crushed or collapsed by accident. The metal frame had survived, even the side mirrors were still attached, though pitted and dull. But when his eyes moved toward the trunk, he saw something that made him frown. The seam along the edge was uneven, jagged in places, as if someone had welded it shut. "Mike, look at this," he said quietly. The man climbed down beside him, crouching low. "That's not factory work," Samuel murmured. Mike nodded, tapping the welded line gently with a wrench. "Sealed from the outside," he said. "Whoever did this didn't want it opened." Samuel straightened slowly, a chill running up his back despite the afternoon warmth. His gaze traveled to the rear, where a license plate should have been. The mounting holes were empty, the metal around them clean, almost polished compared to the rest of the car. Someone had removed it with care long before the car ever touched the ground. He said nothing for a moment, listening to the distant hum of the excavator idling above the wind, whispering through the rebar like a low, mournful whistle. There was an unease in his chest that he couldn't shake. He had seen accidents, even crime scenes over the years of working near city infrastructure, but nothing like this. Nothing so deliberate. He walked back to his truck, pulled out his phone, and hesitated. For years, he and his son Tom had barely spoken beyond obligatory birthdays and awkward holidays. Their lives had drifted apart, carved by old words neither wanted to revisit. But this, whatever it was, felt bigger than work, bigger than pride. Samuel took a long breath and dialed. Tom answered after a few rings, his voice cautious, formal. Dad Samuel hesitated, then said quietly, "We found something at the Hazelwood site. You should come down here." When Tom arrived an hour later, the sun had shifted, painting long shadows across the pit. He stepped out of his cruiser, adjusting the badge on his jacket. At 28, he carried himself with restrained confidence, though the slight stiffness in his movements betrayed nerves. He approached the pit, eyes narrowing. Samuel said simply, "It's a car. Found under the garage foundation. The trunk's welded, the plate's gone. Tom crouched, resting his forearms on his knees. His eyes traced the lines of the car like he was reading something written in a forgotten language. "I've seen this before," he murmured. Samuel frowned. "What do you mean?" Tom looked up slowly. "There's an old cold case in the archives, missing person 1964. The file mentioned a car like this, a blue convertible. Belonged to a man named Arthur Hale. City official. He vanished during an investigation into construction kickbacks. They never found him or the car." Samuel's heartbeat quickened, though his face stayed still. "And now it's here." Tom nodded, his expression tightening. The rumor was that the project he was investigating was right here in Hazelwood. This garage was one of the first city-funded builds of that era. The two men stood in silence, the air between them taut with old distance and new weight. The machine's engine sputtered to life again above them, echoing through the pit. Samuel glanced at his son, searching his face for something, trust perhaps, or belief, but found only the same guarded professionalism. "You think it's connected?" he asked quietly. Tom didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the welded trunk, on the faint glimmer of blue metal half buried in shadow. "If that's his car," he said finally, his voice low, then someone made sure it stayed hidden for a very long time. Samuel followed his gaze, the wind carrying the smell of rust and damp soil. Around them, the world kept moving, machines, roaring, dust swirling, but inside that pit, time had stopped. Something waited inside that car, something that had outlived the men who buried it, and both father and son could feel its presence like a pulse beneath their feet. Samuel turned away, staring out at the horizon as the light dimmed slightly, a cloud passing across the sun. He didn't know yet what they had uncovered, but he knew one thing with certainty: the ground had given up its secret, and the past was about to surface in ways neither of them could control. The following day brought a biting wind that swept across the Hazelwood site, carrying the scent of rust and wet soil. The car now sat fully unearthed within the pit, its once shining body dulled to a bruised gray. A thin film of dirt clung to its surface, and water from the overnight rain pooled in the curves of its frame. Samuel stood beside his son, at the edge of the trench, both of them silent, as the crew worked to clear the remaining debris. The air felt heavier than the day before, filled with a strange reverence, as though the men feared disturbing something sacred or cursed. Tom knelt near the rear of the car, his gloved fingers brushing the welded seam of the trunk. "If we're opening this, we do it by procedure," he said quietly, half to his father, half to himself. Samuel nodded, understanding the weight behind his son's tone. This was no longer a construction find. It was evidence. A crime scene reborn after 6 decades of silence. The forensic team arrived before noon, their equipment cases clicking shut in the cold air. A torch hissed to life, its bright flame throwing fleeting shadows against the dull metal. Samuel stepped back as the technician began cutting through the welds. The sharp, acrid smell of burning steel stung the air. Each spark that fell onto the dirt below seemed to mark the countdown to a truth no one was ready to see. When the final strip gave way, a low creak echoed through the pit, followed by the sound of metal loosening its grip on time. The lid lifted slowly, reluctant, as if resisting the light. The first thing Samuel saw inside was leather, dark, cracked, and swollen from moisture. A suitcase wedged diagonally against the interior, coated in a thin film of mold. It looked ordinary, heartbreakingly so, yet it carried the gravity of a tomb. One of the forensics officers reached in, carefully hand steady. The suitcase came free with a muted scrape, leaving behind a faint impression in the dust. Samuel's heart thudded as the officer set it on a clean tarp. They unlatched the clasps. A wave of air, stale and metallic, escaped, as if exhaling from another century. Inside lay the remnants of a life reduced to fragments, a neatly folded jacket, a cracked pair of glasses, and beneath them the unmistakable ivory curve of a skull. Additional bones lay loose within the trunk cavity around the suitcase. The collective breath of everyone nearby seemed to vanish at once. A human skull, weathered and pale, rested beside a small pocket recorder, its casing corroded but still intact. Tom drew in a slow breath. "Oh my God." He whispered the words, barely audible. Samuel stared, unable to look away. One of the technicians began cataloging the items with quiet precision. "Male," he said softly, approximately mid-40s. "Been here a long time." Tom's voice steadied as training took over. "We'll need dental records," he said, pulling a small notebook from his pocket. "Check against missing persons from the 60s, especially city officials." Samuel's gaze drifted to the recorder. It was an old dictaphone, the kind that ran on thin reels of magnetic tape. The edges were rusted, the surface dented, but the reel still sat within its casing like a dormant heart. "Can it still play?" he asked quietly. The technician shook his head. "Unlikely, but we can try to extract the data." Tom crouched closer, studying the object. "Arthur Hale used one of these," he said. "He recorded interviews, meetings, campaign speeches. It was his habit. If this is his, we might hear something." They brought in a small playback unit from the forensic van, connecting it carefully. Static filled the air, followed by a faint whirring sound that rose and fell like a breath through dust. Then came fragments, broken syllables, distant, like echoes from beneath water. "Hazelwood. Not clean. Don't trust them." The machine crackled, fell silent, then resumed briefly, a single word stretching into static. "Truth." The playback stopped. The reel spun uselessly for a moment before ceasing. No one moved. The faint whisper of those words hung over the pit, mixing with the sigh of the wind. Tom looked at his father, eyes wide but unreadable. Samuel swallowed hard. There was something intimate about the voice, the way it seemed to reach through decades, pleading to be heard. It wasn't the voice of a stranger. It was the voice of a man who had known he would never be found. "We'll send it to the lab," Tom said finally. "Maybe they can clean it up." But his tone betrayed uncertainty. Samuel crouched beside the open trunk, staring into the hollow space that had been sealed for so long. The sight of the suitcase, the bones, and that small machine made his skin prickle. He reached out, and without thinking, brushed a fingertip along the edge of the recorder. A technician immediately collected the device with gloved hands, bagged and labeled it, and noted the potential contamination in the chain of custody log. The metal was cold, almost painfully so. A tremor passed through his hand, not from fear exactly, but from the strange recognition that what he touched was not just evidence, it was the heartbeat of a story that had refused to die. For years, Hazelwood had whispered of corruption, of something rotten beneath its polished civic pride. And now, lying open before them, was proof that the whispers had once been screams sealed away beneath concrete. Samuel rose slowly, dust clinging to his knees, his eyes locked on the trunk's hollow. "Whoever buried this," he murmured, "didn't just want to hide a man. They wanted to bury what he knew." Tom said nothing, his gaze fixed on the bones as the forensic photographer's flash illuminated the pit in harsh, momentary bursts of white light. The silence that followed felt like it stretched beyond time itself, heavy and waiting for the next breath that would disturb it. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint scent of rain, and Samuel turned toward the horizon, unaware that something or someone was already watching the excavation from the shadowed edge of the site. By the third morning, the Hazelwood site had turned into a quiet storm of speculation. Reporters had gathered behind the barricades, their cameras pointed toward the excavation pit, where a lifetime's worth of secrets had surfaced. Samuel stood near the yellow tape, feeling the exhaustion in his bones, his breath clouding in the cool air. He had slept little, haunted by the image of the open trunk and the hollow sockets of the skull within. Tom moved briskly among the forensic team, giving quiet instructions, his composure steady, though the weight of the discovery pressed on them both. The old dictaphone had been sent to the state lab, but the faint words it had captured still echoed in Samuel's mind. "Hazelwood. Not clean." Those fragments felt less like evidence and more like a curse. Near noon, Tom approached his father, a clipboard in hand. "We've contacted the last person still alive who worked at City Hall in '64, he said. "Eleanor Hayes. She lives just 2 blocks away. She says she remembers Arthur Hale." Samuel nodded silently. The name stirred faint recognition. He had heard it years ago in passing, perhaps from old town records or whispered gossip. He didn't expect her to come in person, but an hour later, a small silver sedan pulled up near the site. From it stepped a woman whose frailty was softened by dignity. Eleanor Hayes was 77, her back slightly bent, her eyes pale but piercing under the brim of her wool hat. She moved slowly, leaning on a cane, every step measured and deliberate. Tom greeted her gently. "Mrs. Hayes, thank you for coming. We thought you might help us identify a few of the items." Her lips pressed into a thin line as she nodded. "I'll do what I can." "Officer Reeve." Her voice trembled, but not from age, it was something heavier, the tremor of memory long suppressed. They guided her carefully down to the edge of the pit where the car still rested under a tarp. The smell of earth and rust mingled with the faint sweetness of oil. When Samuel pulled back the cover, Eleanor gasped softly, her hand gripping her cane. Her eyes locked on the car's faded blue frame, and for a moment her body seemed to falter, her breath catching in her throat. "That car," she whispered. "I know it." Tom stepped closer. "You're certain?" She nodded slowly. Arthur Hale drove it, every morning. The city garage used to keep it clean for him. Her gaze drifted to the open trunk, where the remnants of the suitcase and the empty space inside were still visible. Her cane shook slightly as she pointed toward the car. "That's where it happened, isn't it?" Her voice cracked, the weight of 6 decades pressing through her words. Tom hesitated, unsure how much to tell her. "We believe it might be his vehicle." "Yes," he said gently. "You knew him well." Eleanor's face tightened. "I worked for him, and for the mayor, at the time Harold Fenwick." She looked away, eyes glassy with something between grief and fear. Arthur was investigating misused funds. He kept records names times everything. He said he was going to expose them all. Her voice lowered. I told him to stop. A silence followed, broken only by the whisper of wind through the scaffolding. Samuel studied her expression. There was more, he could see it in the way her jaw clenched and unclenched in the tremor that refused to leave her hands. "Mrs. Hayes," he said softly, "did you ever see this?" He handed her a photo taken earlier of the dictaphone found beside the remains. She took it, staring for a long moment. The color drained from her face. Her fingers curled around the image, the paper crumpling slightly under their pressure. "Yes," she said, almost a breath. "I know that recorder." Samuel's brow furrowed. Arthur's Eleanor shook her head faintly, her voice barely audible. "No, mine. I gave it to him that night." Her admission hung in the air like a confession whispered to no one in particular. Tom blinked momentarily, stunned. "You gave it to him, why?" Eleanor's eyes glistened. "Because he asked for proof. He said he couldn't fight them without something that spoke louder than paper. I told him it was dangerous, but he wouldn't listen." She paused, the words breaking against her throat. "When he left my office that night, I followed him. I saw him stop outside City Hall, waiting in his car. Then the mayor's men arrived. Her cane trembled against the ground. I heard shouting. They forced him into the trunk, and they told me to stay silent." Samuel's chest tightened as she spoke each word, dragging decades of guilt into the light. "You knew," he said quietly. "You knew they buried him." She turned toward him, tears streaking her wrinkled cheeks. "I didn't help them bury him, but I didn't stop them either. They said if I spoke, my son would disappear just like Arthur did." Her voice cracked under the memory. "So I stayed silent. Year after year, pretending I'd forgotten. But every time I passed this street, I felt it under my feet, the place where the truth was buried." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain again, the same scent that had followed every new revelation. Tom's hand rested on her shoulder, firm but gentle. "Mrs. Hayes, this helps more than you know. You're doing the right thing now." She looked at him, eyes hollow, yet determined. "There's more you don't know," she said, her voice lowering to a whisper. "Arthur suspected one of his own was leaking information. He told me before that night he thought someone close had betrayed him." She swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she tried to steady herself. "He was right. It was me." Tom's breath caught. You... She nodded, her lips quivering. I told the mayor where Arthur was going. I thought it would scare him, make him stop. I never thought they'd... Her words broke, dissolving into silence. The weight of her confession hung heavy between them, the faint hum of machines fading into the distance, as if the entire world had gone still to listen. The sound of rain began to fall, slow and steady, tapping against the tarp, and the metal of the car soft, but unrelenting. Eleanor closed her eyes. Her face turned toward the sound, as if waiting for it to wash away the years that had clung to her soul. Evening settled over Hazelwood with the quiet heaviness that comes after rain. The site was empty now, cordoned off with yellow tape fluttering in the wind, but Samuel stayed behind, standing by the pit that had become a wound in the earth. The hum of the generators had faded, leaving only the sound of dripping water from the scaffolding above. He rubbed a hand across his face, feeling the grit of dirt and fatigue. The conversation with Eleanor Hayes still echoed in his head, her trembling confession, the sight of her frail body shaking under the weight of what she had carried for 60 years. He could not shake the image of her tears falling onto the damp tarp that covered the car. Tom's cruiser headlights appeared through the mist cutting across the muddy ground. His son stepped out, his expression set, his posture rigid. Samuel could see it in his eyes, the questions forming the doubt he didn't yet know how to voice. "We need to talk," Tom said flatly, his tone not as a son, but as an officer. Samuel nodded, already weary. "Go ahead." Tom glanced toward the pit. "This land, this garage, it was built by Reeve Construction, wasn't it? Your company?" Samuel hesitated. "It was my father's company back then before I took over." Tom crossed his arms. "So our family's name is on the original project, the same one that covered up a murder." The words hit hard, sharper than Samuel expected. "Tom," he said, forcing calm into his voice, "I was 2 years old when that car went into the ground. I had nothing to do with what happened." Tom's jaw tightened. "You inherited the company, Dad. You kept the contracts alive. You think nobody knew what was under here? You think all those years of rebuilding this place, not one person said anything?" Samuel felt the sting behind his ribs, the tone, the distance, the implication that he was part of something rotten. "I didn't know," he said firmly. "When I took over, the records were already sealed. I ran the business straight. That's all I've ever done." Tom shook his head, stepping closer. "You expect me to believe that? That nobody ever mentioned a missing car or a dead politician buried under your site?" His voice rose slightly, not in anger, but in disbelief. "Come on, Dad. This isn't just a coincidence." Samuel's patience frayed, not from his son's accusation, but from the sadness in it. "You think I've spent my life lying to you? To this town?" His words came quieter now, almost pleading. "Everything I've built, every day of my work, it was to keep things honest, to do right by people." Tom stared at him, his face unreadable in the dim light. Samuel could see the struggle there, the son torn between duty and blood, between what he'd sworn to protect and what he wanted to believe. "I have to follow the evidence," Tom said at last. "You understand that?" Samuel nodded slowly. "I do. Just don't forget who you're following it against." He turned toward the pit, the faint outline of the car barely visible beneath the tarp. "You think this is about me, but it's not. It's about what people did to hide the truth. People with power, not men swinging hammers." Tom's silence was sharper than accusation. He looked down at the ground, his boots sinking slightly into the soft mud. "You always think you're the only one who carries the weight," he said finally. "But you don't see what it's like for me to walk into a case and realize my own name is on it." Samuel opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. There was no defense that would ease that burden. He had spent his life trying to keep their family apart from the town's politics, from the corruption that once ran through it like a vein. But here they were again, caught in its shadow. The silence stretched between them, thick and cold. Tom took a slow breath, then turned away. "I need to file my report," he said quietly. "You'll hear from the department soon." His voice was all professionalism now, the tone of a man who could not afford to be a son at that moment. Samuel wanted to stop him to say something that could bridge the gap. Anything but the words wouldn't come. The years of distance between them had grown roots too deep for one conversation to undo. Tom started toward his car boots crunching on gravel. The faint beam of his headlights cut across the pit again, glinting off the tarp that hid the car beneath. Samuel watched him pause by the door, his hand lingering on the handle, as though torn by something unseen. For a moment, Samuel thought he might turn back, but he didn't. The car door shut, the engine rumbled to life, and the cruiser rolled slowly away, its taillights shrinking into the mist. Samuel stood alone again, the sound of rain returning in a soft whisper across the site. He looked at the pit one more time and felt a sharp ache in his chest, not just for the man buried beneath the earth, but for the sun driving away into the dark, carrying doubts that might never be lifted. The machines around him were silent, the world reduced to the faint patter of rain and the echo of words that had cut deeper than any blade. Somewhere beneath his feet, the car remained still, the secret inside it waiting, and above it all, a father stood in the dim light, wondering if the truth could ever heal what it had already broken. 2 days after the argument, the sky over Hazelwood hung low with winter light, pale and thin like paper. Samuel stood alone in the storage building behind his company's main office, where decades of archives lay stacked in uneven rows. Cardboard boxes leaned precariously against one another, their labels fading to illegible smudges. He had not been inside this room in years. The light from a single hanging bulb flickered as he pulled open the first file cabinet. The drawers rasped, exhaling cold air and the scent of iron. He was not sure what he was looking for, exactly only that the doubt in his son's eyes had driven him here. He wanted to prove, if only to himself, that his family's name was not part of what had been buried. He set aside contracts, payroll slips, faded invoices, until one folder yellowed and soft with age caught his attention. The tab read, Hazelwood Development, 1964. His heart began to pound. He laid the folder flat on a dusty workbench and flipped it open. Inside were building permits, engineering sketches, and a folded sheet marked Private Authorization. The ink had bled slightly, but the signatures were clear enough to read Mayor Harold Fenwick, and beneath it, Eleanor Hayes, assistant to the mayor. Samuel stared at the names, his throat tightening. He turned the page and found a second document, a receipt for additional concrete deliveries dated 2 weeks after the original foundation was supposed to have been completed. The cost was unaccounted for, paid in cash, authorized under a line marked Special Civic Project. He traced the line with his finger. The signature again was Eleanor's. The implication formed slowly, like a bruise darkening under the skin. They had poured more concrete than the design required, enough to bury a car, enough to seal a man away. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the next set of notes. Attached was a memo written on city letterhead. The paper had browned with time. The ink faded to a faint purple hue. It read, meeting scheduled between AH and press to present findings. Evidence includes recorded audio. Proceed with caution. The note was unsigned. Samuel leaned back, letting the weight of the discovery settle. Arthur Hale had planned to expose them. Fenwick the counsel, perhaps, even Eleanor, and the dictaphone he carried, had been his safeguard, the truth recorded in his own voice. Now the meaning of that broken tape struck harder. The words, Hazelwood, not clean, don't trust them, were fragments of a warning never heard. The machine had not been just a clue. It had been the instrument of a man's final stand. Outside rain began to fall again, soft and steady, the sound of it against the tin roof echoing through the hollow room. Samuel turned when he heard a faint knock at the door. Standing there framed by the gray light was Eleanor Hayes herself, wrapped in a heavy coat and a scarf that barely hid the pallor of her face. "You shouldn't be here," Samuel said quietly, though without anger. She stepped inside her cane, tapping against the concrete floor. I heard from your son you were looking through old files, she said. I thought maybe I could help you find what you're looking for. He met her eyes. I found it already. Her gaze fell to the papers spread across the table, and for a moment she didn't move. Her breath came uneven, shallow. She approached slowly, the tip of her cane tracing a faint path through the dust. Where did you get these? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. They were in my company's archives, he said. My father must have kept copies. He kept duplicates of every municipal authorization tied to pores, and change orders a habit from years of audit disputes. Eleanor's hands trembled as she reached toward the folder, but stopped short of touching it. I never thought anyone would see those again, she said. I begged him to destroy them after it happened. He said he couldn't, said someday the truth might matter. Samuel studied her. So my father knew. Her eyes glistened, and for a long time she didn't answer. When she finally spoke, her words came out in a fragile rush. He knew a man was missing, but he didn't know who or why. Fenwick gave him money to add more concrete, told him it was for foundation stability. He didn't ask questions. People didn't back then. She lowered herself into a chair, her cane resting across her knees. Arthur was supposed to meet the press that night. He told me he had everything recorded that no one could silence him anymore. When he didn't show up, I knew something had gone wrong. By dawn, the first layer we had poured during the night had already set over the car. Samuel looked down at the papers again, the faded signatures that now seemed to scream. He was buried alive in the structure you both signed for, he said softly. Eleanor nodded, tears gathering but unshed. The mayor said it was the only way to protect the city's future. I believed him for a time. I told myself it was necessary, that the truth would destroy too much. But it destroyed me instead. She reached out her thin hand, brushing the corner of the memo. That recorder, she whispered, it was supposed to save him. He said if anything happened, the tape would speak for him. They must have realized that and sealed it with him so no one would ever find it. Samuel stared at her hand, the trembling fingers hovering over the evidence of her own complicity. You've carried this for 60 years, he said quietly. Why come now? Her answer was almost too soft to hear, because the ground decided it was time. She looked up at him, eyes hollow but determined. You have to finish what he started. The wind rattled the window panes, scattering a few loose sheets across the floor. Samuel caught one before it slid away, the line of signatures glaring back at him through the years, binding the living to the dead. He stood there in silence as the rain drummed harder above the papers, fluttering like restless ghosts around them. And for the first time since the car was unearthed, he realized that the truth had never been lost. It had been waiting buried under his family's own foundation. 3 days later, the wind swept through Hazelwood with a chill sharp enough to sting the skin. The sky hung overcast and heavy, a pale ceiling pressing down on the small city. Inside the forensic lab at the county station, Samuel stood beside his son, watching as a technician adjusted the controls of the old dictaphone that had haunted his thoughts since the day it was found. The room was sterile, and still its silence broken only by the soft hum of the playback equipment. The machine looked fragile, half corroded, and patched together with wires that trembled at the slightest touch. The technician, a quiet man with careful hands, nodded toward the recorder. We've cleaned what we could. The magnetic reel is badly damaged, but we managed to extract fragments. You won't get much more than that. Tom glanced at his father before saying, "Play it." The man pressed a button. The speaker crackled to life, a low static filling the room like a ghost breathing through the walls. For several seconds, there was nothing but noise. Then a faint voice emerged, distant and grainy, as though clawing its way out of the earth itself. Hazelwood. Not clean. Don't trust them. The sound faded, replaced by static again. Then another broken phrase fragmented by time. They know. They know everything. And then silence. The reel spun once more before stopping completely. The room held its breath. Tom exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. That's all. The technician nodded. We'll keep trying to restore it, but the rest of the tape is gone. The oxide layer's disintegrated." Samuel stared at the recorder, the faint echo of that voice still vibrating in his chest. He imagined the man, Arthur Hale, alone in his car, the weight of truth pressing down on him, his last words captured on a fragile strip of tape. It wasn't evidence in the legal sense. It wouldn't convict anyone. But it was the sound of a man who knew what was coming, and that made it unbearable. "He was warning someone," Samuel said quietly. Tom looked at him. Maybe himself. They both turned as the door opened. Eleanor Hayes entered, escorted gently by an officer. She looked smaller than before, the lines on her face deeper, her steps slower. In her hands she held a handkerchief, already crumpled from use. When she saw the recorder sitting on the table, she stopped. "You found it," she whispered. "You found his voice." Samuel motioned toward the chair, but she didn't sit. "We played the tape," he said softly. "Do you want to hear it?" She closed her eyes for a moment, then nodded. The technician replayed the fragment. As the words filled the room again, those broken syllables heavy with despair. Eleanor's lips trembled. Her hands clutched at the edge of the table, as though holding herself upright against the weight of the sound. When the voice faded into static once more, she lowered her head, and a quiet sob escaped her. "He was right," she whispered, her voice barely holding together. "Hazelwood wasn't clean. None of us were." Samuel stepped closer. "You told me the mayor's men took him," he said. "You didn't say how." Eleanor's shoulders shook. "Because I couldn't bear to. I thought keeping quiet would let me forget, but I never did." She turned toward the recorder, her reflection faint in the dark plastic surface. "That night after they forced him into the car, the mayor ordered me to stay. He said it had to be done properly, no loose ends. I helped them pour the concrete. I watched as the first layer covered the roof." Her voice cracked, and she pressed the handkerchief to her mouth. "They said it would be quick, that he was already gone." "They lied," I heard the pounding. Tom froze, his expression tightening as the words sank in. Samuel's heart lurched. "You were there," he said softly. Not accusing, only stunned. "You helped bury him." Eleanor nodded slowly, tears streaking her cheeks. "I told myself I had no choice. I told myself I was protecting my family. But it was cowardice. Every night since I've seen that car in my dreams, trapped under the concrete, his voice still calling for help." She looked at Samuel, then her eyes hollow, but honest. "When you dug it up, I knew the time had come. I thought I'd feel relief, but all I feel is shame." Samuel wanted to speak, but no words would come. He looked at the recorder again, at the faint red light still glowing from the power switch. The tape had given them fragments, nothing more shattered truth without context, a warning that came too late to save anyone. It was not enough to undo the past, but it was enough to remind them of it. "This is all that's left of him," he said finally. A voice that survived what men tried to silence. Eleanor's breathing steadied as she looked at him. It survived because it had to. Because the truth refuses to stay buried. Her hand reached for the recorder, trembling as she touched it. "I kept quiet for 60 years, and it never set me free. Maybe now by telling you he can finally rest." Tom stepped closer, his tone measured but gentle. "Mrs. Hayes, what you told us will help close the case. It's not too late to tell the full story." She gave a small, tired smile. "Oh, officer, it's far too late for justice, but maybe not for peace." She turned back toward the window, where the fading daylight spilled across the floor in pale streaks. The reflection of the dictaphone glimmered faintly beside her, the last echo of a voice that had outlasted everything. Time, concrete, and guilt. Samuel stood motionless, his thoughts a tangle of sorrow and revelation. The tape had given them only fragments, but in those broken words lay an entire confession, a town's corruption, a woman's remorse, and a truth that had refused to die. The hum of the machine faded, and in that dim, breathless silence he realized that the past was no longer beneath the earth. It was standing right beside them, alive in every heartbeat of the present. The following morning broke with a fragile calm, the kind that feels borrowed, as if the world itself is holding still before deciding what to do next. A soft fog rolled across Hazelwood's narrow streets, cloaking the old buildings in silver haze. Inside Samuel's office, the air smelled faintly of dust and coffee. Papers from the old archive were spread across his desk, blueprints, receipts, signatures that had waited half a century to be seen. He sat there quietly, turning each page as if handling something sacred. The light filtering through the blinds drew thin lines across his face, deepening the lines of exhaustion carved by sleepless nights. The door creaked open, and Tom stepped inside. His uniform was still damp from the rain, his expression guarded but less severe than before. "You wanted to see me?" he asked. Samuel gestured to the desk. "Sit down. There's something you need to look at." Tom hesitated before pulling up a chair. His father slid a small stack of folders toward him. "These came from our old storage. You'll want to read the signatures." Tom leafed through the first document, his brow furrowing as he recognized the mayor's name. Then he froze. "Eleanor Hayes," he murmured. Samuel nodded slowly. She signed the authorization for the extra concrete. It wasn't just a mistake, it was the cover-up. Tom turned another page, scanning the receipts and handwritten notes. "This proves she was part of it," he said quietly. "But it also shows my grandfather's company supplied the materials." His voice faltered. "It ties us to it." Samuel met his gaze. "Our name was used, not involved. You know the difference?" Tom exhaled heavily, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You think the department will see it that way?" "It doesn't matter how they see it," Samuel said. "What matters is what you do with it." He leaned forward, his tone steady but gentle. "This town built its pride on concrete laid over a man's grave. You have a chance to make it right. Publish it. Let the truth be heard." Tom stared at the papers again. The weight of responsibility pressed on him like a physical force. "If I release this, it'll tear everything apart," he said. "People who've lived their whole lives here, they'll see their heroes for what they were. You'll lose contracts, maybe worse." "Are you ready for that?" Samuel smiled faintly, but his eyes were tired. "Son, I've been ready for a long time. You asked me once if I knew what was buried here. I didn't then, but I do now, and I won't be part of hiding it again." His voice softened. "I can live with the truth. I can't live with silence." Tom sat back, staring at his father as if seeing him for the first time. The man who had always been steady, practical, unshakable, now spoke with a kind of quiet conviction that left no room for doubt. "You really believe this will help?" he asked. "No," Samuel admitted, "but it will set things right. That's all we can do." The room fell silent, filled only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Tom finally gathered the papers and stood. "I'll take them to the department," he said. "But once they're out, there's no going back." "That's the point," Samuel replied. When Tom left, the office felt strangely lighter, as though the weight of 60 years had begun to shift. Outside, the fog was thinning, revealing the outlines of the town, familiar yet changed. The next day, Hazelwood woke to headlines that broke like a storm. That morning, the medical examiner confirmed a dental records match, establishing the remains as Arthur Hale. Cold case exposes. City Hall conspiracy remains identified as politician Arthur Hale. News vans lined Main Street, their antennas reaching toward the gray sky. Reporters swarmed the site of the old garage, where police tape fluttered like ribbons in the wind. People gathered in small clusters, whispering faces pale with disbelief. The town that had prided itself on order and reputation now faced its reflection in the mirror of history and recoiled. Tom stood at the press table, uniform crisp, his voice steady, as he confirmed the discovery and the evidence. Cameras flashed, questions rose and fell like waves, but he spoke with clarity, unflinching. Behind him, Samuel watched from a distance, unnoticed among the crowd. For the first time in years, he felt something close to peace. That night, when the noise had faded and the streets emptied again, Tom drove to his father's house. The porch light burned low, a soft circle of warmth in the cool dark. Samuel was sitting there, nursing a cup of coffee, his gaze distant. Tom climbed the steps and paused. Neither spoke for a moment. The silence between them was no longer sharp. It was simply space waiting to be filled. "They're calling it the biggest revelation in Hazelwood's history," Tom said at last. "You did the right thing." Samuel replied. "No," Tom said quietly. "We did." He sat beside his father, the wood creaking softly beneath them. For a long time they said nothing more. The night smelled of damp leaves and distant rain. Somewhere the church bells marked the hour, their sound gentle and clear against the hush. Samuel looked at his son, the light catching the lines of his face, and saw not the boy he'd raised, but the man who had carried their family name through the storm. "You're your grandfather's son," he said. "He would have wanted it this way." Tom's eyes flickered with emotion, but he only nodded. "I think he would have too." They sat there together, two silhouettes against the dim light, bound not by the past that had divided them, but by the truth that had finally set them both free, or as free as anyone could be after digging through the bones of history. The air felt lighter now, and for the first time in a long while, Samuel let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, redemption didn't come in grand gestures, but in the quiet act of facing what had always been there beneath the surface. The news spread through Hazelwood like a slow, steady ripple. For a few days, the town hummed with disbelief, anger, and sorrow. But then, as all storms do, it began to quiet. The headlines faded, the cameras left, and only the truth remained heavy, unchangeable, and strangely peaceful. In a small white house not far from the site, Eleanor Hayes sat by her window, watching the late autumn light drift through the lace curtains. The world outside looked untouched by what had happened, yet she felt as though she were standing at the edge of her final chapter. The doctor had told her that her heart was failing, but she had known that long before the diagnosis. Guilt, she thought, could wear a heart thin faster than time ever could. On the small writing desk beside her sat a single sheet of paper and a worn leather locket, the kind once carried by men in the 1950s. She had kept it all these years hidden in a box beneath the floorboards. Inside was a small photograph of Arthur Hale, his smile faint but steady, and beside it a pressed maple leaf, the color of old fire. She touched the photo gently, her fingers trembling. "I'm sorry, Arthur," she whispered. "I should have spoken sooner." Then she began to write. Her handwriting was frail, but careful, every word a confession and a farewell. "To whoever finds this, I was part of what happened to Arthur Hale. I told myself I was a victim, but I wasn't. I made choices and they buried him for those choices. He trusted me, and I betrayed that trust. If there is any mercy left in this world, I hope he finds it before I do." She paused, the pen hovering above the page as her breath slowed. "Give this to Samuel Reeve. He will know what to do. And please, when he moves, Arthur, bury this with him. He deserves at least one honest truth beside him." She folded the letter carefully, placed it inside an envelope, and slipped the locket inside with it. Then she leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes as the last of the afternoon light faded to gold. When her housekeeper found her hours later, she was still seated by the window, her face peaceful, her hands resting atop the letter, as though guarding it. The following morning, Tom and Samuel received the call. The envelope was brought to the police station, its edges smudged with age and faint traces of perfume. Samuel read the letter silently, while Tom stood beside him, the weight of Eleanor's words settling between them like dust. When he reached the final line, Samuel let out a long, trembling breath. "She's gone," he said softly. Tom nodded, eyes distant, but she made it right in her way. They looked at each other for a long moment, neither needing to speak. The thought that lingered unspoken, some truths came too late for justice, but not too late for grace. A week later, the town gathered quietly beneath the tall maples on the north side of Hazelwood Cemetery. The air was cool and still, the leaves above them flickering gold and amber in the weak sunlight. There was no media, no speeches, only a handful of townspeople who remembered the name Arthur Hale and wanted to stand for what was owed. Samuel stood at the head of the small gathering, his hands clasped in front of him, his voice low but steady as he spoke. "We bring him here today, not just as a man wronged, but as a man remembered. Hazelwood was built on his silence. Let it now rest on his truth." Tom stood beside him, his uniform crisp, his expression solemn. When the casket was lowered, simple pinewood unadorned, Samuel stepped forward and placed the envelope and locket atop it. For a moment, his hand lingered there, his thumb brushing the edge as if to seal a promise. The wind picked up gently, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and cold earth. As the first shovelful of soil fell, Tom reached out, resting a hand on his father's shoulder. "You did good," he said quietly. Samuel shook his head. "We both did." Behind them, the townspeople bowed their heads. The maple leaves swirled in slow, graceful circles, catching the light as they fell. Eleanor's letter had been buried with Arthur, as she wished a confession turned offering a bridge between the living and the dead. Samuel looked around at the faces gathered there, some tearful, some solemn, all changed in subtle ways. The truth had not undone the town. It had reshaped it. Hazelwood would carry the scar, yes, but scars were proof of healing of something once broken made whole again. When the service ended, people drifted away in silence, leaving Samuel and Tom alone beside the fresh mound. The wind sighed through the trees, scattering a few late leaves across the grass. Samuel took a slow breath. "Funny thing," he said softly, almost to himself. "All these years we've been building on top of lies. Turns out the only thing that lasts is the truth." Tom looked toward the trees, their branches bending gently under the weight of the season. "And the people who finally choose to tell it," he said. They stood there a moment longer, letting the quiet settle around them. The air carried the faint smell of rain, the same scent that had followed them through every discovery, every confession. It was the scent of endings and beginnings alike, and as Samuel closed his eyes, he wondered if somewhere beyond that stillness, the voice buried beneath Hazelwood had finally found peace. Autumn returned to Hazelwood with a tenderness the town had not felt in years. The air was cool and scented with the faint sweetness of maple leaves, turning to gold and red, their edges curling in the soft wind. The cemetery on the north ridge shimmered under the low sun, every tree a quiet flame against the gray horizon. It was the kind of day that made silence feel sacred, the kind that wrapped even grief in something gentle. Samuel Reeves stood beside his son, the earth still fresh beneath their boots where Arthur Hale had finally been laid to rest. The funeral had been small, but honest, attended only by a handful of townspeople, some too young to remember the scandal, some too old to forget. According to the family's wishes, Arthur's remains were cremated after the service, and a simple urn was placed beneath a maple whose branches bent as though in reverence. A new headstone marked the spot clean unadorned, engraved with only a name, 2 dates, and 1 line below them, "The truth endures." Tom stood beside his father, hands in his pockets, his expression steady, but his eyes damp. The last few months had changed him. The investigation, the headlines, the long hours of reconstruction, it had all stripped something from him, but given something back too. He looked older now, quieter, his anger replaced by understanding. Beside him, Samuel felt the same. The work had ended, but the weight of it remained a kind of ache that would never fully fade, but no longer needed to. He looked down at the urn, then up toward the trees where light drifted through like dust through stained glass. He waited a long time for this, Samuel said softly. Tom nodded. So did she. He reached into his jacket and unfolded a piece of paper yellowed at the edges, but carefully preserved the copy of Eleanor Hayes' final letter, written in her trembling hand. He had read it a dozen times since her death, but somehow the words still struck the same chord each time. If you are reading this, it means the truth has finally found its way home. I am not asking for forgiveness. I am only hoping that by confessing, I have left the ground a little cleaner than I found it. Tom's fingers tightened slightly around the letter before he tucked it back into his pocket. She wanted to come here, he said, to see this. Samuel exhaled slowly. Maybe she has. They fell into silence again, the kind that spoke more than words could. The wind moved through the leaves above them, a long sigh that seemed to carry voices from another time. Samuel thought of all the years that had passed, the generations who had walked Hazelwood streets without knowing what lay beneath their feet, the way guilt had trickled down through concrete and memory, until someone was finally willing to dig. He looked at his son, seeing in him both the boy who once followed him around construction sites and the man who now carried their family's name with quiet integrity. "You did the right thing," he said. Tom shook his head. "We did the hard thing. There's a difference." Samuel smiled faintly. "Maybe, but sometimes the hard thing is the right thing." The wind picked up, rustling the leaves in a slow, rhythmic whisper. A few strays spiraled down, landing softly on the mound of earth. Tom crouched to brush them aside, his hand lingering on the soil as though he could feel the pulse of the man beneath it, the long echo of justice delayed, but not denied. "Do you think he knows?" he asked. Samuel's gaze followed the drifting leaves. "I think he always did. He just needed someone to listen." The sun dipped lower, casting a warm amber glow over the graves. Somewhere nearby, a bell tolled faintly from the old church tower, its sound carrying through the stillness. The town beyond the ridge went about its day, children walking home from school, shopkeepers sweeping their porches, the mundane rhythm of life continuing as it always had. But something had shifted, subtle, yet certain. Hazelwood had changed. The ground that once hid shame now held remembrance, and the air itself seemed lighter for it. Samuel thought of Eleanor, of the way she had wept, when the dictaphone played that broken voice of the courage it took for her to finally tell the truth. He thought of Arthur Hale, whose words had survived 60 years of silence, and of his own father, who had unknowingly helped bury the secret that haunted them all. He felt at last that the circle had closed. Tom straightened his eyes, fixed on the trees, swaying gently above them. "She was right," he said quietly. "The ground is cleaner now." Samuel nodded, his throat tight. Cleaner and truer. They turned to leave their steps slow, their shadows stretching long across the grass. As they reached the path, Samuel paused and looked back one final time. The leaves danced above Arthur's grave, their colors vivid against the fading light, and for a moment it seemed as if the whole earth was breathing alive, forgiving, renewed. He felt tears gather, but they came softly, without shame. "You know, son," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "the truth has a way of growing even under concrete." Tom met his gaze and gave a small nod. The wind rose again, lifting the leaves into a quiet swirl, and somewhere within that sound, beneath the rustle of branches and the whisper of time, it felt as though a voice long buried had finally found its rest. Samuel took a deep breath, the crisp scent of autumn filling his lungs, and as they walked toward the gate, he spoke the words that would stay with them both for the rest of their lives. Words, simple, final, and true. No matter how long it's buried, the truth will always bloom again on Hazelwood soil. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more tales like this one. What do you think was the most powerful moment in Hazelwood's secret? Tell me where you're watching from in the comments.